here in a dream. I'm just stuck here in a dream.
Welcome to episode 20 of the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummell. In today's episode, I talk with Jonathan Hickory. He's been a police officer for 18 years in Virginia and is the award-winning author of the book Break Every Chain that is now a powerful award-winning movie. I reached out to Jonathan after seeing a Facebook post about his book. As I often do when I stumble upon interesting people, I did a little stalking and reached out to him on LinkedIn. Jonathan and I exchanged a few emails before recording this episode, and although I only just met him, he's one of those guys that's just so easy to talk to, and I feel like I've known him for years. The reason why I think this is the case is that his story just really struck a chord with me. It's so familiar, so personal for me, and it rings true, and reminds me of other aspects of other people's stories that I've heard over the years, friends, peers, and coworkers. And it also made me think about why storytelling is so important and the whole platform for this podcast. It's one of the best ways that we can teach, influence, and inspire each other, and it forges connections among us, our culture, our unique sister and brotherhood. Hearing stories like Jonathan's helps us relate on an intuitive level like no other and reminds us we are not alone. In this episode, Jonathan and I discuss the loss of his father and the pain of being bullied as a teen, his experience of trying to reach out to an experienced officer for help, and the shame that he felt when he was shut down with the old school mentality. He discusses how his unresolved trauma led him down the path of self-destruction and how he went from Officer of the Year one year to landing an IA, being stripped of his badge and gun, and the worst part was that he was ordered not to talk to anyone. Jonathan candidly discusses how his work as a fatal crash investigator impacted him and how the devastating loss of his second child hardened his heart. Jonathan credits his healing to both his faith-based marriage counselor and his police psychologist, the support of his loving wife Stacy, his 3 beautiful children, and his faith in God. If you find value in this episode, please share it, give us a review, and if you'd like to be notified of future episodes and want to receive our future newsletter, you can subscribe on our Podbean website or email us at wendy@bluelineyoga.com. I'd love to hear from you with your questions, suggestions for future guests, or topics you'd like to hear about, and I'd really like to get feedback on this episode too. So today I'm really looking forward to talking to Jonathan Hickory. He's a master police officer in an agency in Virginia, and he is also the author of the book Break Every Chain, which has now become a movie. He is also very active in his church. He's a dad, a husband, and has a very full life, is what it sounds like. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It is my pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, and so even though the listeners can't see us, we can see each other. And what's really cool is that you're sitting outside and we're hearing some nice nature sounds from, you said you just had a storm there, right?
Yeah, it's like the calm after the storm. So we get some crickets and some birds chirping, and it's very, very nice, cool summer evening.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's a little warm here in Kansas right now, so I'm a little jealous. So Jonathan, let's talk a little bit about your book and your movie. But before that, I was telling you before we got started that I don't really know a whole lot about your story, but I was very intrigued. I have a friend who posted something on social media about your book, and I just kind of started stalking you, quite honestly. And I thought you had a really unique story, and really anytime anyone wants to share what they have been through and navigated and overcome adversity, especially in law enforcement, I really, that's the whole platform of this podcast, is for people to share stories. So I really appreciate your willingness to do that with us.
No, that's what it's all about. It's trying to help others. It's when people overcome something as great as I have overcome, and as great as so many other heroes overcome, you have to help others, and kind of carry those buckets of water for those that are still in the pits of hell.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So how long have you been a police officer for?
Just a couple days ago was my 18-year mark.
Wow, congratulations. That's a pretty long amount of time to be in this profession.
Nowadays, it definitely seems like it is. Yeah. So I have 8 more years full time if I go to full retirement.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, what I always like to ask this question because it's always a little bit different for everyone. What inspired you or what made you decide to become a police officer? Was it something you always knew you wanted to do, or how did that pan out for you?
No, I don't think I always knew I wanted to do it. I it it's actually part of my story. Really, it's I lost my father early in life. I grew up originally in small town New England, and when I was 12 years old, after battling for 13 months against terminal cancer, my father passed away, and he died at home. We took care of him for about 3 months before he passed away, and so my life was completely turned upside down. I have 3 siblings, there's 4 children total. My mom and dad had been married for 23 years when my father passed away. He was only 49, and my mom was 43. So that began 3 months later. We moved 600 plus miles away to the state of Virginia, and we're 12 hours away now from any support system that I had previously. Church, school, family, friends, things like that. So, that made for like some rough teenage years, and I had a very low self-esteem. I was kind of a nerdy kid at that point, and I isolated, and I loved computers, and I also was battling a lot of anger and a lot of depression. I was angry at just the world. I was angry at myself. Like, I was angry at God for like taking my dad. I was angry at myself for not being a better son, and like not saying I loved you more, and just things that you think about when you're 12 years old. So my teenage years were really, really hard. I was bullied, and that, I think, struck a chord with me. Like, let justice be done. But sorry, there's a school bus going by, so I apologize for
That's
the audio.
okay. I assume that.
Yeah. So as I came into early adulthood, I was job hopping quite a bit, and I finally found a career in computers, and things were going pretty well until 9/11 hit. When 9/11 hit, I found myself unemployed, and I really wanted to pursue law enforcement at that point because my birthday's also on the same day as 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And I remember like 9/11/01, when the towers fell, I left work that day, and I went and bought a gun for my birthday present to myself. And I'm like, I want to do something. I want to make a difference here. And so that's when I became interested in law enforcement. When I found myself unemployed, I'm like, well, I need a job that I can have job security, and I guess there's always going to be crime. So that's kind of what led me into it.
Wow. So you were how old when you made that decision?
Well, I went in for it the first time when I was 22. I didn't get hired until I was 23.
Okay. So you were still fairly young.
Yes, way too young.
Well, and it's really interesting that you gave us all of that for your background, because I know that you teach a lot at your agency on this topic. And so much of what impacts us as adults has started early on, which, I only recently really understood the connection between the two. So I appreciate you sharing all of that, because I think a lot of people listening can maybe really relate to what you just said. And coming into this profession, just for different people, it's different, like how full that pot is of what we've already got going on before we even start this job. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to realize, because a lot of people that struggle in law enforcement with the trauma, the vicarious trauma, and the trauma that they face every day, they're the ones often that you can look back and find something earlier in their life that traumatized them and that they're carrying around even before they get into the job.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get on with your agency. I assume, I don't know if you are with the same agency that you started with, but nonetheless, 18 years later, when did you start to notice, I guess if I'm going to ask this the right way, that you might be in trouble or things were amiss?
Well, I got married about 3 months after I completed my field training program. So everything seemed to be going well for me at that point. I felt like finally I was starting to thrive and my life was going well. I had a great new job, and I had this beautiful, amazing wife. She also was raised in a Christian home, and just an amazingly sweet girl, my wife Stacy. And so this was all happening at once. And I never had a problem with any kind of substance abuse. I never had any addictions or anything like that. When I got into police work, at first it's all very fun and new, exciting. You want to lock up the bad guys. You want to, shoot guns. You want to drive fast. You want to do all that stuff that you see on TV. And then the reality of it starts to set in. And the things that you never see in the job description, like, must be able to handle scenes with infant death. That's never in the job description.
Right.
Must be able to, investigate motor vehicle crashes with, burning families. Stuff like that is never,
Right.
You never think about that stuff. So the reality of it began to set in, and I found myself in a very strange place where I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I knew that I had to be tough, and I had signed up to be a cop. I saw how other officers just kind of shook it off and like it was nothing. And even when I went to a senior officer later in my career, I remember him laughing at me. I was telling him that I had, nightmares and recurring images, and he just said, "You got to suck it up and you got to let it roll off your back." And I'm like, well, that's really helpful.
Wow.
I'll remember not to, ever ask you about for help, regarding that. And this guy was like a mentor to me. But so it was probably about the 2-year mark, to answer your question, that I started to turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism. It's so culturally accepted in law enforcement. And I knew that everyone else was drinking as well. And so I felt like it was okay. And I justified it because I was on midnight shift and, I needed it to sleep and things like that. But soon it started to become something that I really let into my life as a problem. And, before I knew it, 10 years of my life had gone by, and I was a functioning alcoholic, to the point that I had to drink every day. And to the point that I would hide my drinking, my liquor and things like that from my wife. And, even as like we had our first daughter together, and I tried to quit and I wanted to be a good dad because my dad died when I was young. I just kept going back to it. I was fully addicted, and I just denied it, well, I would never drive drunk, so, I'm not an alcoholic. Or, I know that I'm still going to work every day, so, I'm not an alcoholic. But the truth was that I had to drink, every day, and if I didn't, I would become extremely irritable, and I would get like physical withdrawal symptoms where I would felt like things were crawling on me. And so it was a real problem, and it ruled my life for a long time.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, and sounds just a lot like other people that I've spoken with that have been in a similar situation that you just described. So, but just to back up, you said something earlier that just kind of really took me back, because you actually tried to reach out for help. You said you had a mentor and you let him know what was happening, and he brushed you off. And it makes me wonder, it must have taken a lot of courage for you to approach him about that in the first place. And I'm guessing that was pretty significant.
It made me feel shameful. It made me feel like I was somehow weak and broken, and why was everyone else able to handle it and I wasn't? So it made me question myself. And yes, this was a senior officer, someone that I looked up to, someone that I was a mentor to me, and he was this old school mentality, and the old school mentality, unfortunately, is what oftentimes causes people not to reach out for the help that they need.
Yep.
And that eventually can lead to self-harm, and suicide.
Yeah, unfortunately, I use those exact words when I talk about this stuff. Just suck it up. It's part of the job. It's what you signed up for, and it's not.
No, it's
It's
not what I signed up for.
it's
I signed up to
absolutely.
help people, right? Because I care. And, I never thought that it would change my life as much as it did. However, what's interesting is that while I was struggling internally and while my marriage was falling apart and while I continued to lean on substance abuse as a coping mechanism, my career thrived. And,
Wow.
I was officer of the year in a 145 150 man department, and I'm not saying that to boast. It's just like that's when when your personal life is falling apart and all you have left is your job. Then that's all you wrap your life around is that's your new identity, you know. And so that's where it becomes a suicide risk, because if you then have a problem with your career, then you have nothing left.
Right. And really, you truly were the definition of a functioning alcoholic if you were performing to the extent that you were, being awarded the Officer of the Year. That's pretty significant. So you obviously were not, because sometimes it seems like it is hard to separate all of that out when you're struggling with alcohol and things are hard at home. It does typically have an impact when people come to work, and it doesn't appear that that was the case, at least not that anyone caught on to.
Right. I think that only when it gets to the point where like somebody could maybe smell it on your breath the next day, or you come into work and it's still in your blood, that can be, a problem. But I just never, I was very careful about that. But it's just one of those things where cops are great actors, and we don't want anyone to know that we're broken and that there's something, off in our personal lives or something wrong with us. And so we put on this facade, and it starts with the uniform and it works its way backwards.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So for you, what was if there was a turning point, or if it was one moment, or was it a series of moments that just made you realize I can't continue like this?
What really changed my life was my wife and I had a 5-year-old daughter at the time, and in 2013 we were pregnant with our second child. And this was a small glimmer of hope. I was already in a very dark place at this point. I wasn't crazy about having another kid at first, but I started to warm up to the idea. I was filled with a lot of bitterness and cynicism, and I felt like the world was a very dark place, and I shuddered at the thought of bringing another child into the world. I started to warm up to the idea. I had built the crib. I had listened to the placed my face against my wife's stomach and listened to the baby. I remember our marriage was so on the rocks, so I went to one of our ultrasound appointments, and we got an argument in the waiting room, like in the room, while we were waiting for the doctor or whatever. And like after that, I didn't go to any more. That's how bad our relationship was.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was very sad because we were so in love when we got married. We were engaged for over 3 years. And so we started having complications with the pregnancy, and about 5 months into the pregnancy, in the 20th week, it was a Sunday afternoon in October, and our firstborn son was born at home, deceased in our bathroom.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Wendy. I can talk about it now, but it wrecked me.
I can't
and
imagine.
I was already in such like a hopeless, dark place, and I had been at that point I had been a fatal crash reconstruction officer
Yeah.
for about 5 years, and so I was the death was always swirling around me. I did not deal well with death because of the death of my father, and I didn't realize the connection at the time. But in retrospect, maybe becoming a fatal crash guy was not a good idea, right? But
Probably not.
the more you know, right? So it was it was this thing where all this death that had swirled around me in my career for so long, I felt like I was tiptoeing through it, had now come into my home and into my heart.
Yeah. Wow.
And suddenly I found this like new heavy darkness cast over me, like no darkness I've ever known, like no heaviness I've ever known. And I tried to fix it every way that I knew how. My other coping mechanisms outside of drinking were things like working out at the gym, and angry music, and motorcycle rides. Like, I enjoy riding, but none of that stuff worked. None of that stuff would heal this huge hole, dark hole in my heart. And so I started to self-destruct. And, that's something I've learned as I teach classes about trauma now and mental resilience, is that unresolved trauma will destroy you. Self-destructive behavior is actually quite normal with unresolved trauma. I began to any call with a knife or a gun. I was always the first one to go there. Reckless behavior in my marriage. There was infidelity and affairs. Something I'm extremely ashamed of and not proud of, but it is part of the story. And my wife knew nothing about it, and we became more and more distant. I couldn't look her in the eye. I couldn't be in the same room with her. I almost associated her with the death, and obviously that was completely unfair and irrational, but that was my screwed up, broken, traumatized mind, trying to rationalize it without getting help. So 18 months after I went into self-destruct mode, as I swirled downward into this, downward spiral, I found myself in internal affairs for the first time in my career, having just been awarded Officer of the Year prior. And I was told that I was being investigated for conduct unbecoming of an officer, and it was because of the infidelity. And I was told to turn in my, they put the tape recorder down and they said, turn in your lock codes, your password, your laptop, and your department phone and all that. And and by the way, you can't talk about this with anyone. So I knew I couldn't talk about it with my wife, and now I wasn't allowed to talk about it with any of my friends, because now all my friends were cops, and I deleted all of my other friends, which is also foolish. We need other people in our lives.
Yeah.
So I went home. They sent me home early, and I went home and I pondered, well, I'm going to lose my job because this is a fireable offense. I'm going to lose my wife because she's going to find out. And I'm going to lose my daughter because she's going to go with my wife. And so, this voice in my head said, just end it all. It's time. There's no coming back from this, and just end your life. And the weapon, of course, is always close by, and it was the most sickening, dark moment of my life. And in that moment, like, the battle for my soul was raging. I had this strange vision of like fire. I don't know if I felt like, it was me believing I was going to go to hell, or if I did that, or I have no idea what it was. But it scared me enough to snap out of it for a second and say, wait a minute. If you do this, there is no coming back.
Yeah.
And other people are going to suffer. So that was the moment that I broke down, and I started to talk to God. And I said, God, like, if you're even there, because, but prior to that, I really struggled with belief in God. He had taken my father from me, had taken my firstborn son from me, and not that I was living in any capacity for God, but I felt like he kind of sucked. But I said, God, like, I've done everything I can, and I've brought myself to the end of me, so, it's your turn. So I started to go to church after that, and I started to, try to better my life, and tried to cut back on my drinking. And it took about 2 months to get through the investigation. And at the end of the 2 months, I was told that I wasn't going to lose my job, but I was being disciplined, and I was going to, night shift, and they put me in an old Crown Vic, and like, they did everything that, I'm grateful to have my job at this point, but I continued to lie to my wife, and I didn't tell her why I was being disciplined. I didn't tell her about the investigation. I thought I could get away with it. But God revealed that to her eventually anyway. And then we went into crisis mode. When we went into crisis mode and she had found out about my sins against her, that was a hard place to be. And I've been rambling for a minute, so I'll let you talk.
No, I'm just taking it all in. I'm just letting you talk. It's okay, but I just want to make one comment. Really, the very first thing you said about the loss of your son, and you talked a lot about how it impacted you. But what I can't get out of my head is how hard that must have been for your wife and your daughter too. I mean, so this is not just impacting you, which of course, obviously, this is your story, but your family too. I mean, this is significant loss for all of you.
Absolutely. It's our story. No, you're right. It's not just my story. I don't think it's fair to say that I was the only one hurting. Stacy was hurting as well. And, we had this, after the loss of our son, we had this very brief period where we drew closer to each other. Mm-hmm. But then it was gone. It was, I started hurting so bad that, and I just knew that I didn't need help because I was tough. I'm a tough guy. I'm a tough cop, and counseling doesn't work. It's a bunch of BS. That's what I would think. My heart was so hardened that I was not open to any of that. But counseling saved my life and saved my marriage. Interestingly enough, because when we did hit that crisis mode, when she found out about the infidelity and stuff, I was so petrified that I was going to lose her, and that's why I was not going to tell her, because I was so ashamed and so afraid to tell her. But our church helped us to find a faith-based counselor, a marriage counselor, and it was between that and a police psychologist that I also started to see that I thought that the marriage counseling was going to be all about the marriage, and it turned out, Wendy, that it was all about how screwed up I was. I remember the marriage counselor hearing all the stuff that I'd been through, hearing my story, talking about the infidelity, talking about the loss of my father. And she looked at me when I was finally done, and she said, "Wow, I'm surprised you're doing as well as you are."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like, wait, you've seen worse? So that helped me a little bit in that moment. But, we did 5 months of faith-based marriage counseling, and it went all the way back to the loss of my father. I had never faced it, and I was carrying it around with me every day, to the point that every time I watched The Lion King and Mufasa died, I would cry.
Yeah.
So...
That is a sad movie, though. I mean, it is.
It's okay to cry when Mufasa dies.
Right.
It's okay. But, yeah, no, it was just something that, if that's something that's so important to realize, is that if you have trauma in your life and you don't face it and you're not coping with it well, ultimately over time, it's going to one-up you. It's going to destroy your life.
Yeah, and you're actually really fortunate, and I'm so glad you found one or two therapists or counselors that work so well for you without having to try multiple counselors.
No, we were very blessed because it seemed like we got connected to the right people at the right time.
That's important. So after seeing the marriage counselor and also a police psychologist, you said,
yes.
How soon after that did you start to realize that your alcohol dependency needed to change there? Because it doesn't sound like it was like an overnight thing.
I'm just moving a little bit because it felt like the signal was starting to get weak.
No problem.
So the alcohol actually, on the night that we went into crisis mode, when my wife had found out and my mom actually got involved, and there was like this intervention type thing going on, and I opened my heart and I confessed to everything, and I cried and I laid on the floor, and I knew that there was no hiding it anymore. And that night my wife told me, like, she said, I'm not going to kick you out of the house, but you're going to be on the couch because, like, it was because we had a 5-year-old daughter and she didn't want our 5-year-old daughter asking questions. And I remember that night I was sitting on the couch, my new assigned bed, and I had a beer bottle in my hand as usual, and I could hear across the house. All I could hear was my wife weeping.
Aw.
And I just felt like such a complete piece of garbage, such a complete piece of trash. And I'm looking down at this bottle in my hand, and I'm like, and I hear this voice, and I think it was God, but, you know, I hear this voice say, change your ways and stop drinking, or I will take everything from you. And that kind of gave me those goosebumps, and I got scared, and I put the bottle down, and I said, okay, like, please take this from me, because I can't do this on my own. And I woke, and I put it down, and I didn't touch it again that night. And the next morning, like, I told my wife that I had been hiding my drinking problem from her for over 10 years. And she helped me clear the house of alcohol. She became my accountability partner, even while she was super pissed at me, by the way. Like,
She sounds like a really great woman. You're lucky.
I really believe she was appointed for me. Like, I don't deserve her. I know that. I don't deserve her mercy or her forgiveness or her grace. But I, you know, just going back to that moment, like, that was the last time I touched alcohol, and that was 6 years ago. That was
Wow.
August of 2015.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a much better life. And, you know, people will ask me, like, will you ever take another drink again? And, you know, I really don't think I will. And it's not because I don't think I could handle one beer or whatever, but there's 2 reasons that I won't touch it again. Number one is I don't need it. I have such a much better life now without it, that why would I bring that back into my life, especially after I struggled for so long with it. And the other reason is Proverbs 4:23 says, above all things, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So I'm going to guard my heart, especially in an area where I had such a weakness. I'm going to layer the armor right there and stay away from it. But, you know, the healing journey has been a very long one, Wendy. And over the years, I've learned, you know, how to be resilient and how to heal from your trauma. And, you know, therapies, how important they are. But it's not just me that's healed. You know, my wife has healed. Our marriage has been restored. And since August of 2015, when we went into this crisis mode, we've had 2 beautiful children since then.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So we have, you know, now an 11-year-old. My daughter Anna is now 11, almost 12. We have Zachariah, who is almost 5, and then we have baby Hope, and she's really more of a toddler now because she's almost 14 months, but she's our blue-eyed baby girl. And I just have this amazing new outlook on life, that we deserve to live the life we've been given, and that we deserve to live free.
Yeah, that's so inspiring. And I know when other people hear this, they're going to think the same thing. So thank you for just speaking so openly and honestly and candidly about everything that you've been through. I am curious because, you know, we talked a little bit before we hit record about a little bit about what I do. But I do see a lot of people that have addiction issues. I mean, I encounter them just, you know, doing peer support and some other things. So what I am always curious about is everyone's journeys to healing are different. There's no one right way. There's no one right path. So it sounds like you stopped and you've never gone back. Did you go to, I'm just curious, like any support groups or anything beyond therapy and your wife, which sounds like an amazing accountability partner? Was there anything else that you did along those lines?
Yeah, there was tons. So
Okay.
First of all, you know, at first, when I first said, God, like, I surrender to you, and I tried to cut back on my drinking, it was a struggle. Like, I couldn't do it by myself. but I was still trying to do it by myself, and it was like this battle I was fighting all by myself. I was also fighting the battle of the investigation going on, wondering if I was going to lose my job, and when you're struggling with that for 2 months, it takes its toll on you. I think I lost 15 pounds just from the stress. But I started going to a men's group. So that's group therapy, and it doesn't have to be. It was a men's Bible study group, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be any kind of group therapy can be helpful. Because one of the beautiful things about group therapy is that not only do you get other people's perspectives on things, but you start to realize that you're not the only one that's screwed up. You're not the only one that's broken. We're all broken in different ways. And so I think there's comfort in knowing that you're not alone in that. Other than group therapy and a police psychologist and the faith-based marriage counselor, I started serving. So volunteering, serving in my church, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're serving in your church, but serving in something that helps others makes you feel like you have a purpose, makes you feel like you matter, and that you're doing something that matters. And so that was helpful for me as well. And starting to diversify my friends' portfolio really helped. So when all that you have as friends, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you become a cop, you usually start, especially when you're younger, you start getting rid of all of your friends who aren't cops, or not really talking to them as much because they just don't get it, and they ask you all these stupid questions, and like, what have you ever shot anybody, and like,
yeah.
So I know that I started hanging out with only other cops off duty, and so every time you're hanging out with other cops off duty, the conversation always goes back to work, and you can't, it's like 24/7. You can't get away from it. You start to live and breathe the job, and now your friends are all cops too, and so if you are struggling with something, and cops can be some of the worst people to talk to, just because they're so used to hearing people's problems, and they don't want to hear it. They want to get to the point of how can we fix that? How can we fix this call right now? Have you thought about a protective order? Whatever. Like, and so they don't want to hear all the details. They don't want to hear the sob story. And so that's one of the things that's helped me and that came with the men's group, is I suddenly had all these like brothers that would pray with me and talk to me about stuff that I needed help with and I was struggling with. So that was a beautiful thing. And as those things started to help with my healing, then I started realizing the importance of maintenance therapies, like exercise. Like for me, riding a motorcycle. It might be paddle boarding for you. It might be knitting. It might be whatever, horseback riding. So you have to find a therapy that works for you. I think that's why a lot of these like veteran programs, they use like sailing and fly fishing, because it's therapeutic to kind of reconnect with nature, reconnect with creation, get out and do something that makes you kind of forget about the world for a while.
Right. Amazing. And it sounds like, because I know you mentioned peer support in your current role, but what you just described by your men's group and how that was really beneficial, I mean, that's its own brand of peer support, just that group support.
Yes, absolutely. And I still go to that men's group today. I was actually just asked to be one of the leaders for the group. So, that's an honor as well. But yeah, it's one of those things that even after you feel like you're doing better, you don't quit it.
Right.
Like if the counselor tells you, okay, I think you're okay, like doesn't mean that you don't go back if you're starting to struggle again. And just because you are, you've been in a group environment for a long time, well now, as you've healed and you've learned how to cope in healthy ways, let's pass that knowledge along and help somebody else that's hurting,
Yeah, definitely. And so if you don't mind, I want to kind of take this moment to transition to what you're doing at work with peer support. How does that how does your agency or in your role, how does that work? Or is it something that you volunteer for? Is it something that you fell into that you started because of your background or?
We had a team for years, but I didn't even know it.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those. So some agencies are really bad about advertising their peer support, and I feel like there should be flyers up in the bathrooms, in the mailroom, like don't forget about us. We're here for you, something like that. And we're like, instead, the department I work for, it's almost like we're ninjas, and we kind of go in behind the scenes when we know somebody was exposed to something awful. And that's damage repair. I think that we are an established peer support team, but at the same time, I just feel like it should be promoted more to kind of help destroy that stigma that exists against getting help and talking about it. So that's my role currently. I also teach a class at our police academy, which is a regional academy, to veteran cops on resilience, mental wellness, and suicide prevention.
Oh, great. So you do that how frequently at your agency?
This year I'm teaching it 3 times.
Okay.
It's an 8-hour class, so they kind of stick it in there at the end of a 40-hour in-service. And so like all these old school guys that really need it get it, and they even when they don't sign up for it.
So how does that go when people are mandated to go to that kind of training? What's your experience with that?
So it's usually very different than if you advertise the class as a standalone and people sign up because they want to take it.
Right.
You're starting to see more people that are willing to take it, but it's that old school mentality. You know, it's those guys that have been around forever, that suck it up buttercup mentality. And quite honestly, that mentality is what's killing our cops, because it makes people afraid to get the help that they need. And even the guys that say that suck it up, even if they're suffering in silence, they won't get the help they need because they think that, they're weak. And so those guys will be there, and they'll be in the very back, and they'll have their arms crossed, and I don't let it faze me. I just keep on doing what I'm doing, and, I know that they're hearing me, and, they need to be there just as much as the next guy. So if I reach them, wonderful. If I don't, at least they were there.
Right. So as far as your book, can you tell us, your book is titled Break Every Chain, is that right?
Yes.
And I don't know how long ago it came out, but can you just tell us a little bit about, I'm assuming that's part of your healing journey. Like what made you decide, hey, I'm going to write a book about all this, and now which it's a movie, which I don't know if it's been released yet, but just can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the release is coming up very soon, so we'll talk about that. But
Okay.
The book came out in 2018, late 2018, and how it was very therapeutic for me to write it.
I bet.
That was something that I did not expect, by the way. But the way that it was born was this men's group that I was going to. They had prayed me through all this hell that I was walking through in my life. And when my wife and I became pregnant with Zachariah, we were petrified because we had lost our other son, Christian. And so we were afraid that we were going to have pregnancy complications. And so they walked with me through that, and they prayed over the pregnancy. And Zachariah was born, healthy and well. And after, the restoration of my marriage and the healing and everything, one of the guys in my men's group came up to me, and he said he'd been praying, me through all this stuff, and he said, "Brother, like, I feel like you're gonna write a book." And I'm like, "Brother, I feel like you're smoking crack." It's like, like, you do realize I'm a police officer, right? And like, we hate writing, like as minimal as possible, like, facts only, no opinion in our reports, so. But like, it was really laid on my heart at that moment to write the book, and God like started surrounding me with people that were writing books, and I'm like, okay, like, I get it. So
Okay, I hear you.
Right, yeah. So here's the interesting thing is that while I was writing the book, I wrote about the faith-based marriage counselor. I wrote about all those details, but I was still too ashamed to write about the police psychologist.
Really? Wow. Okay.
I was still early in my journey, right? And so I was still too ashamed that I'm like, well, the marriage counseling will cover the counseling part of it. Like, so at least it's covered. But I just finished an afterword, and I actually have published posts on my my Break Every Chain. It's not the Break Every Chain movie Facebook page, but I've published posts on there that acknowledges like the importance of seeing the police psychologist, and how he talked me off the edge, like this when I was contemplating suicide. But I just thought that was interesting because while I was writing this book, like I had no idea. I had no idea about the police suicides. I had no idea that it was the number one killer of cops. I felt like I was the only one that had ever struggled like this.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm certainly alone. This is such a huge waste of time. Why am I writing this? Like, no one's ever struggled like me. I'm the only screwed up, broken, weak cop. Like, and I was still thinking like that. But as I started to try to market it and, started reaching out to like social media groups and things like that. That's when I started getting educated on all these suicides.
Wow. So
all this-
you didn't even know any of that until your book was already published. Is that right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So that's even the whole book in and of itself, and the release sounds like that was supposed to be a part of your healing journey too.
Right. I just was like, well, God can use it to help somebody.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll help another cop. If there's anybody out there who is struggling or has ever struggled with alcohol or depression or loss, grief, or maybe a married couple that has struggled with infidelity. We know that's rampant in the police culture. And so it's all these things that like no one ever wants to talk about. And so I'm like, well, maybe it'll help somebody. Like maybe someone will be helped by the telling of this story. But God had a purpose for it, and I just had no idea. I had no idea what he was going to do with it. So if you get that feeling in your heart that you're supposed to do something, do it, because you never know what might happen, right?
Right. And it just speaks to like your courage and bravery, because the fact that you still had that shame around that piece with your police psychologist, but you did it anyway, that speaks volumes, really.
I appreciate you saying that. I feel... I kind of feel, looking back, like I really wish I had put that in the book. So what I did was I did put an afterword in the book on the third edition, which is I'm working on it right now. The publisher has it and they have to finalize it or whatever, but it talks about it. And not only does it talk about it, it talks about the fact that I was ashamed to write it in the book originally.
Well, I'm going to wait until that's released then before I buy it. So I'm glad I didn't get it yet.
I'd be happy to send you the afterword if you do want to get it now. But
okay.
Yeah, the problem with that is that Amazon's got stockpiles of it, so you could order one when I say here's a green light, it's out, and you might still get one that's not the right version.
Oh, I see. So I could just go ahead and get it, and then I'll just take you up on your offer and have you send it to me then. The after.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send you the afterword and the epilogue that my wife wrote.
Ooh, yeah, I'd love to read that.
Yeah. So that's 14 pages that we're adding to the back of the book.
Wow,
an
amazing.
epilogue that she wrote. Yeah. Which is good because I think it's just as much her story obviously as it is mine. And we're really excited about that. But the movie.
Yeah,
so
let's hear about the movie.
How did that happen?
Yes.
So the movie is absolutely incredible. You can go on IMDb right now and watch the trailer, and you'll be blown away if you haven't seen the trailer, because it is a faith-based film. I'm not going to try to minimize that, but at the same time, it has been killing it in film festivals that are not Christian film festivals. It's won 5 Best Inspirational Film Awards in Prague, Paris, Las Vegas, New York, and that it's also won some Best Actor awards, and so it's doing amazing in the film festival run. It's a very high quality film, and it is extremely powerful, very engaging.
I can't wait to see it. So But just back up a minute. How did that happen? So did somebody read your book and just say, we need to make this a movie? Or how did that even happen?
Well, I had several people tell me that, and people will say that, and you're like, yeah, yeah. But so I started to pursue it on my own.
Okay.
And like, I even went so far as to I bought a ticket to a Comic-Con in Richmond, Virginia, and I went and met David A.R. White, who is the founder of PureFlix. He's like big time in all these faith-based films. And I gave him a copy of my book, and I'm like, this is it. Like, he's going to make a movie out of my book. And, well, I never heard from him. But I did get to meet him. So I started doing everything I knew how to do, trying to pursue getting it made into a movie, and nothing was happening. So Stacy and I, my wife and I, started to pray, like God, you've done a lot with this book. There's cops coming to me behind the scenes all the time that are saying, like, this is my story, like, thank you for writing this, like, I know I'm not alone. Cops in recovery that are, using it to help other officers. And we started to pray that if God wanted to use it in that way, that if he wanted to use it as a movie and tell the story that way, that he would make it happen. And because we didn't know what else to do. And so a few months later, we got a phone call from the guy that had narrated my audiobook, who also said he thought it should be made into a movie. He was in professional radio for 30 years, and he does voiceovers, and he reads audiobooks. Mm-hmm. And he was actually part of a film that this film company that we ended up working with was making. And he said, like, hey, this guy does like faith-based films too, and like, send me a copy of your book. I'll put it in the hands of the producer, and we'll see what happens. And so the rest is kind of history on that as far as getting it to happen. But one thing I was not expecting was I was going to have to raise some money to make the movie a reality. And so I was told I had to come up with like 15 to 20 grand. This was April 2020, 1 month after COVID started. And so I was like, yeah, that's not happening, but okay. Within 2 months, we had raised $22,000.
Oh, wow.
And then the budget actually went up even more than that, and we were able to get all of it. So it was all donated. It was donated by people who believe in the story, who've read the book. It was donated by widows of officers who died by suicide. And so, that to me was so, like, touched my heart so much that they would give to this because they're so passionate about preventing it for the next police wife.
Wow. Yeah, that just makes it even more of an amazing story. Now I'm going to have to watch the movie.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely going to love it when it comes out. So we've been doing some screenings. And you can actually, if you have a large church and you want to bring it to your church, like, you can go to breakeverychainmovie.com and click on the screenings tab. And there's information there on how you can bring it to your church. But we're going to, I think it's going to be releasing mid-November. I think that, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's going to be around November 15th. That'll be releasing on streaming, digital, and DVD.
Okay, but right now, what people can do if they're interested in learning about it is go where again?
So the website for the film is breakeverychainmovie.com. And we are working on cutting a version of the trailer that we're going to release ourselves. Somehow IMDb got a hold of it, and they won't take it down, and we're not really sure how that happened. But if you want to see the trailer, it's there, so I'm going to embrace it. Go on IMDb's website, look up Break Every Chain, and you can see the trailer. It's about the trailer, I guarantee, will give you goosebumps, especially if you've been in law enforcement any length of time.
Okay, and you're saying if someone is interested in bringing a screening to their church, perhaps, they can get information on the site about that too?
Yes, at breakeverychainmovie.com. Yep.
Great. And of course, Amazon, you can get the book.
Yeah, that's available at like lots of places, but Amazon's probably the way you're going to get it the fastest, yeah.
Okay. And if anybody wants to specifically get in touch with you, I'm assuming still go on the same website and contact you there.
Yes, breakeverychainmovie.com. You can, there's a contact form there, and the email address is breakeverychainmovie@gmail.com. Pretty easy. One thing I wanted to mention is if you are interested in getting a copy of the book, there's another version of another book called Break Every Chain with a author named John something. Make sure you get the right one. It's the one with the police car on the cover. It's by Jonathan Hickory, Break Every Chain. The subtitle is, it's Break Every Chain. The subtitle is A Police Officer's Battle with Alcoholism, Depression, and Devastating Loss, and the True Story of How God Changed His Life Forever.
Okay. And I'm curious, now I'm going to have to find out what that other book is about. The
other book is, it's kind of a deep spiritual book about like breaking demonic chains and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And one thing before we finish, if somebody is listening and they're struggling or their loved one is struggling, what advice? I mean, I know it's hard to just pick one thing, but what would you say to them?
You're not alone. Mm-hmm. I think that is the most cliche thing that we can say, because I recently saw like a meme that said, when you think you're not alone, and it showed like a picture of, a bunch of cops in formation or something. And the problem with that is that so oftentimes when we go to other police officers, we do feel alone, because they're not the best people to talk about our struggles in law enforcement.
Yeah.
You would think that they would be the best people to talk about, but even some of the peer support people aren't always the best. And so if you are struggling, even if you're not in law enforcement, if you're struggling, if you're feeling like depressed, if you're feeling, like you don't matter, like you're drowning and everyone else is flourishing, know that that is something that is normal, and you are not alone, and it is something that you can heal from. It doesn't mean that it's something that you have to like struggle with every day. I mean, every day, yes, every day is a battle, but going to get help from the right people is what's key. And then once you start to heal, then living a life of balanced resilience is how you kind of keep moving forward through life and enjoy the life and live free in the life that you were given. And so what I mean by that is, go see a counselor or a chaplain or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's okay to be on medication. Like, there is no shame in any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is that, you need to heal from it. And when we need to heal, we need to make sure that we see the right people to do that.
That's such good advice. Thank you so much, Jonathan. We really appreciate you sharing your story and your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much, Wendy, for having me on. I love what you're doing.
Yes, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Like Jonathan said, we deserve to live the life we've been given. We deserve to live free, and you are not alone. To get more information or to contact Jonathan directly, you can go to breakeverychainmovie.com. You can also check him out on the IMBD website to view the trailer, and of course, go to amazon.com to purchase his book. If you find value in this episode, please share it, give us a review, and if you'd like to be notified of future episodes and want to receive our future newsletter, you can subscribe on our Podbean website or email us at wendy@bluelineyoga.com. I'd love to hear from you with questions, suggestions for future guests, or topics you'd like to hear about.